Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Charles C.W. Cook, senior writer for National Review, host of the Charles C.W. Cook podcast. And he looks like Mephisto if you're watching on Salem News Channel, because the sun is going down early in Florida, and he's got an odd light effect as a result of his study being framed by the declining sun. I like it, though, Charles. Charles, I want to begin by telling you this week I was in Texas, had the honor of sitting down with and talking with Liz Truss, the former prime minister, was at the American Legislative Exchange Council. You know, she's awfully smart. Why do you think it went so far south so fast on her?
Well, I think the main reason is that she tried to usher in some reforms that Britain badly needs, still needs, but she did so quickly and in a time in which the rest of Parliament and the various institutions in the United States, including the Bank of England, was not ready. And as a result, the markets panicked and she was kicked out. But what she said fundamentally was correct and true and is still going to have to be grappled with by the British.
So they had the first foreshadowing of a really debt crisis. That was an actual debt crisis, or at least the city thought it was a debt crisis. Do you think that the Tory party is, what I talked with her about is off the record, I'm not referencing that, I just asked as a result of the conversation. Do you think reform has replaced the Tory party?
I think it's possible, but of course, as we all know, politicians, political positions, political movements, they don't exist in a vacuum. So the idea that reform will be dealing with a different country if it gets into power than the Tories or the Labour Party were, I think is naive. And a lot of the forces that tried to prevent reform when Liz Truss was briefly Prime Minister and continue to prevent smaller reform now will still be there. So it will have its work cut out just as much as anyone else has. Where reform is slightly different is that it has been more willing to talk in blunt terms about topics that people care about than the Tories have.
Now, I want to use the opportunity of the scandal in Minnesota to talk in blunt terms about the fact some cultures don't assimilate into the West. One of them turns out to be Somali Americans, not because they're bad people. They just live differently than we do. And apparently, in a tribal culture base, fraud is a lot easier to pull off because everyone participates. The number over the night went from $1 billion to $8 billion. Have you been following this story?
I certainly have been following this story. It's astonishing, isn't it, that this story didn't come out until after Tim Walz was the vice presidential candidate.
Well, astonishing is that no one noticed it. It actually came out on Powerline blog. Scott Johnson began covering it in 2022, and no one. It was news to me. I wasn't reading Powerline that week whenever Scott wrote about it, or I thought it must be too minor. Do you think it's going to change our tolerance for fraud? Because I think it might.
Yeah, I think it might. And I also think it ought to remind us that while it is true and a great thing that people can come over to the United States from anywhere in the world and become an American, that is still a process. You still have to assimilate to something. You still have to adopt that set of ideas. The great thing about America is not that we have any idea as the bedrock principle. It's that we have this idea, these rules, this culture. And it takes time for people, especially people who are from very different places. I came over, I had to adjust a bit. It's not too different than England. I already spoke the language. But if you're from somewhere really different, like Afghanistan or Somalia, then it's going to be an effort. And I worry, Hugh, because I'm not sure that we have accompanied mass immigration with that effort in the way we should have. And I'm also not convinced that our educational institutions are bought into the project. And without those two things, then we get problems like the ones we're seeing.
It's also a question of scale. When Vietnam collapsed in 1975, my parish in Warren, Ohio, adopted a Vietnamese family. One family got sent to Warren, Ohio, and the entire parish took care of them. It wasn't outside of San Francisco, Little Kabul. It isn't Little Mogadishu as it is in the Twin Cities. It isn't Dearborn. Do you think that's part of the problem, that too many refugees or new Americans congregate too quickly in one place so that the assimilation has a barrier to it?
I do. I also think it matters that that happens in concert with a country that now provides generous welfare benefits in a way that wasn't the case in the heyday of Ellis Island. 40% of Italian immigrants went home. And we now have a political system in which the incentives are for certain politicians to defend those constituencies, whatever they do, rather than to demand that they assimilate. I think the combination of those things makes this a real challenge.
All right, stick around. I'm going to talk with Charles C.W. Cook after the break about the drug boat strikes. And during the break, we're going to talk about why Tim Walz's scandal did not get much attention, even though it had been unearthed. Stand by. I'm back with Charles C.W. Cook. Charles, my theory of what's going to happen in Minnesota is we're going to find out it's not just a Somali-American problem, that it's going to be a crook problem generally. And my reason for that is it's still dwarfed by the COVID scandal on unemployment grift in the prison system of California. That's almost $20 billion in COVID grift done by prisoners who worked it. They just sent an application, we sent them money. I think the door might actually be open to serious reform of this, of every state and every entitlement program. Agree or disagree?
I agree the door's open. I hope that there are politicians who are willing to walk through it. There's just so much money in America. There's so much money flowing around. It's such an incredibly rich country. And I think that one of the attitudes, which I don't endorse, has been, well, you're going to get some fraud. It's better that we have these programs, send this money out, and acknowledge that, than put impediments in the way that might hurt good people. I just think we have reached the point at which the social unrest that will be caused by too many more stories like this makes that an untenable position to take. Because there are people in Minnesota right now quite rightly thinking, hang on a minute, I pay a lot in taxes. Minnesota has a very generous Scandinavian-style welfare system. Is this really why I go to work every day? So I think the door's open. I just hope that there are enough people who are willing to make an issue out of it, because they'll get called names if they do, and people don't like being called names.
Yeah, and that's why I bring up the California prison system. I believe that was an equal opportunity grift that has no categorization by race or ethnicity or country of origin. It's by definition, criminals ran it out of the prison system. And it didn't make a dent in Gavin Newsom's popularity. And I don't know that this will hurt Tim Walz. We might be anesthetized to grift. Is that also possible?
Well, one of the problems we have is the numbers are so big. People really struggle to conceptualize trillions of dollars, what that means, what that looks like. And $20 billion is just so much. It's like the old Eddie Izzard joke about if you meet somebody who's killed one person, you're shocked. But you hear about a dictator who killed 1 million people, it's almost impressive. You can't imagine it. Maybe it's a lie. And the same is true here. So maybe that's one reason why. But at the same time, I think this one is particularly poignant because the criminals are expected to do this, right? I mean, California, you go, okay. But to have a particular... Right, they're prisoners, but to have a particular community that was taken in as refugees and to use autism as the excuse, it's really grotesque.
I think you are right. I'm coming right back with Charles. We're going to get into the constitutional issues around striking the drug boats. Don't go anywhere. He actually knows what he's talking about, unlike so many other people who've been commenting on this issue. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Charles C.W. Cook is my guest. He's senior writer at National Review, host of his own podcast, the Charles C.W. Cook Podcast. Charles, you've written about the drug boats. I think we have different points of view, but let's put aside people who have said stupid things about it and focus on the core issue. Does the president have the power to strike these boats? I think he does under Article 2. If the argument was well framed, would you be persuaded?
Well, I don't think the president has the authority under Article 2. There's nothing from Congress in Article 1 that has given him this power. There's no declaration of war. There's no AUMF. There's no freestanding law that allows him to interdict drug trafficking in the Caribbean. And he has to rely on Article 2. But there are circumstances that limit that power. I don't think it's a freestanding, open-ended power to preemptively attack boats suspected of crimes, not military or terroristic aims, but crimes. That's my objection.
Okay, let me use the Kurt Schlichter argument. If the boats were full of canisters of mustard gas, could the president strike them?
I think the argument would be much stronger, but they're not full of mustard gas. And some of the attempts we've seen to conflate cocaine and mustard gas, or to suggest that drugs are weapons of mass destruction, that makes a mockery of language, I think.
But tease out for a moment, because Kurt got me thinking about this. No one in America has been killed by mustard gas, and it's a rather old agent, and it's pretty hard to transport. I didn't say sarin, mustard gas. But a lot of people, 25,000 last year, were killed by cocaine. So we actually have substances that actually do kill Americans, whereas hypothetically you're okay if it was mustard gas because it might kill Americans. So
well, I'm certainly
how do you
open
distinguish?
to it, but yeah, well, the distinction is that in international convention and in American law, we treat mustard gas and its deployment as a terroristic threat, whereas we do not treat the selling of cocaine as such. We treat that as a crime. Now, it's a federal crime, I agree, but we don't look at that in the same manner as we would, say, mustard gas or a dirty bomb or a nuclear weapon or what you will. And I don't think we can just slide from one to the other and then assume that Article 2 covers it.
I think we can. And my argument is, and has been from day one, that the commander-in-chief power is into itself whole and unlimited, except when Congress acts to limit it, and then there's a collision of Article 1 and Article 2, and it's up to Article 3 to decide. Thus, the Boland Amendment was effective to stop the weapon sales to or the weapon giveaway to the Contras. It was effective, and it was understood to be effective. But unless until Congress says don't strike the drug boats, I think the commander-in-chief has the same authority that George H.W. Bush did when he invaded Panama. And by the way, was that unconstitutional?
Yeah. I mean, why do we pass declarations of war or pass AUMFs if the president presumptively has expansive Article 2 powers that only need to be reined in? The funding here is not at issue, but it's not in many other realms either where the United States Congress has given the president permission. I don't read the Constitution like that.
I do, and I think the difference between an article, a declaration of war, or an AUMF is scale. It's all about scale, so that when we're going to have to commit American troops in large numbers into a war zone, you need that authorization. But if you're going to do a no-fly zone over Iraq, or you're going to bomb Yugoslavia, or you're going to invade Libya, our entire history is you don't need that authorization. You can get negative cancelization from Congress, and they can always take away the money to run the strikes. They could do that. They could tell the Pentagon not to expend any money. But I think the commander-in-chief power actually, it's not limited. I don't know why it isn't unto itself a power to do something with the military. Why do you put in something that's not there?
But I read the history differently. I don't think it was normal in American history to operate on that basis. I agree with you that it probably has been for 60 or 70 years. But up until Korea, we did pass either declarations of war every single time, or in the case of the Barbary pirates, two effectively AUMFs. Now, one of them was, I will grant, slightly more nuanced in that Jefferson went to the Congress and the Congress said, you don't need it, we've already got that power in statute. But he regarded it as necessary to get permission. Now, in the modern era, yeah, we've backslid. But I'm an originalist. I don't think that evidence of modern backsliding is evidence of original intent.
Well, Jefferson was the originalist. And Jefferson bought Louisiana without... He himself said, I can't do this, and the Congress can't do it. We have to amend the Constitution. He bought it. Then he backfilled with a treaty. So the originalist operated under terms of exigency when necessary. So the originalist, Charles, said exigency matters, and the question is just the severity of the exigency.
I agree, but I don't think that was consistent with the Constitution. I also would note that Jefferson, as you say, did go to Congress and say, do we need an amendment? And Congress said no. Now, I think that was the wrong decision, but it's not as if here Donald Trump has gone to Congress and said, do I need your permission to attack these boats? And Congress has said, no, you don't. Congress hasn't had any say on this whatsoever. The president's just asserting this Article 2 power, which I don't believe is there in this circumstance. If those boats were firing on American naval vessels, that would be a different matter, but they're not.
Now, we're going to have to just agree to disagree on this. Last question, Charles, and thank you for the expanded time here. Do you think that the discussion will lead to congressional action? Because I don't. I think most Americans, and certainly supermajorities of both houses, not will only acquiesce, but applaud the president's actions here. Because too many Americans have died from cocaine and especially from fentanyl.
Oh, I agree with you. I think it's a practical matter. There's no way you're going to get a groundswell in the country or in Congress against this action because, by and large, people will regard its effects to have been salutary. But, you know, the Constitution is the Constitution. So you and I can debate it, but this isn't going to become a live political issue. The issue next year will be the economy.
I agree with that. And affordability. Charles C.W. Cook, follow him on X at Charles C.W. Cook. His podcast is the same as his name, Charles C.W. Cook. And, of course, listen to him on the Editor's Podcast from National Review.